some people don't want to live next to a 400-pound potbelly pig. So in fairness, when you do live in a kind of a built-up city, choose the right pet.
Riverside County Animal Services are an animal shelter organization and vet clinic servicing one of the largest counties in California.
We cover everything from the city of Riverside, which is a large metropolitan area, all the way out to areas out in the Coachella Valley, which are just undeveloped open areas of natural desert. So we get a little bit of everything.
Each year, they respond to thousands of calls from the public, picking up stray dogs, cats, and the occasional, more unusual lost pet.
Riverside County Animal Services, we are a sheltering service to all the stray animals that come in. And of course, we handle a lot of field service work, and that's our officers out in the field retrieving mostly stray dogs and stray cats, and the occasional stray crazy thing, whether it be the occasional monkey, alligator, Burmese python, or somebody keeping a deer as a pet.
We got a call one afternoon that a woman, her 2 dogs, had cornered an alligator in her backyard. My dispatcher gets on the radio, dispatches it to me, and I kind of made a smart aleck remark of, sure, I'll go pick up the iguana, thinking that they just saw an iguana and thought it was an alligator. I rolled up to the house, got out of my truck, see 2 dogs barking at something in the corner, walk over, tell the woman to grab her dogs, and sure enough, there's an alligator in her backyard.
It's interesting because we get a lot of different snakes that come from where they come into people's yards, but we have interesting calls too where someone will call for a snake like this. I had a snake just like this, Southern Pacific, that a person called us that they found this snake in their yard and they were in the middle of the city of Riverside and they conveniently had it contained in a terrarium. And so when I GPS'd the address to try to re-release the snake, I was just thinking to myself, there's no way that this snake ended up in the middle of downtown Riverside surrounded by blocks and blocks and blocks of residential housing. So they obviously went on a trip to the mountains, who knows what, took the snake out of the wild again, and then probably the wife or something was like, the heck no, you're not keeping that snake. And so they called, animal control and said, oh, I found it in my yard, but stuff like that happens fairly frequently. Most of the time it's a legitimate call where you can see, their house is butted up against, natural landscape, and it's like, yeah, if you're going to build your home on their habitat, they're going to come into your yard. But occasionally we get these strange calls.
I've personally got one call where someone had a rattlesnake that they had caught and taken it home, stuck it in a china cabinet, put duct tape across the door of the china cabinet and stuck a brick in front of it and had it in there for a week. And then they quickly realized that they couldn't safely open the door to feed it and didn't know how to care for it. So they ended up calling for help, and I ended up having to go in and remove the rattlesnake out of a china cabinet. So that was a pretty poorly thought out plan.
And it's often poor planning and lack of knowledge that puts exotic pet owners and their neighbors in danger.
The animal, when it ends up doing something really bad, the person always says, but he was always so calm and never showed any signs of aggression. But it just takes one time, right, for that person to suffer serious injuries and in some cases death. So the onus is really on that person that owns the exotic, legally if they have it permitted, to protect their fellow neighbors.
In 2009, a 330-pound pet tiger escaped from her enclosure and was discovered in the backyard of a very surprised 79-year-old woman in Ingram, Texas. A 275-pound pet cougar escaped from his cage in a Florida backyard menagerie and killed a neighbor's dog in 2012. And in 2017, a classroom of third graders were surprised to find a 4-foot-long boa constrictor inside their classroom. Officers believe the snake may have been an escaped pet from a nearby house.
Well, when people are having a pet that's a dangerous, they know how to handle it, but the neighbor doesn't, or the little kid next door has no clue on, that you have a dangerous exotic pet. That's where you as the pet owner need to make sure, just like, in the dog world, if you have a large dog, you want to be responsible, make sure it doesn't get out. And same thing, if you have a dangerous exotic animal, and it doesn't mean it has to be a big animal. A monkey, for example, can bite people, which we had happen in one of our cities that we had to respond to. A monkey bit a person at a pizza place because the person thought it would be fun to have a monkey on their shoulder at a pizza place. And so you got to draw the line sometimes with having a cool pet that's cool for you to have, but making sure your community members are protected and safe. And that would be our message to those folks, is make sure that exotic is not going to harm anyone.
One of the most common exotic animal escape artists is the snake, and the Riverside team are often called to retrieve venomous reptiles from suburban areas.
So both of these guys are from the local area that were brought in by our animal control officers, and I keep them purely for the purpose of using them for training, for rattlesnake safety and handling. So this one is a western diamondback rattlesnake, and how we came across this one was that there was a woman in Palm Desert who had to be put into a care facility, and when they went in to get her out of the house, she had this snake in an aquarium in her house, and it was a little 10-gallon aquarium. The snake was a really tiny little baby, probably just born that year, and so it was a little 10-gallon aquarium with a fish toy in it, like you would see in a fish aquarium, like a sunken ship toy. So she was trying to keep it as a pet. And so because we don't know the exact location of where it came from, you can't just take it and relocate it and throw it back outside. So for us, the only options are either, you find a home for it with a research facility, or maybe an educational institution. Otherwise, it has to be euthanized, unless we know of the natural area where it came from and we could relocate it within its home range.
While Kim provides Riverside officers with venomous snake handling training, there's no way they can train for every possible animal encounter.
Burmese python is a common home pet, or at least in the state of California it is. Another county officer, she got a call in the middle of the night that a 30-foot snake was going through this person's front yard. She shows up on scene, calls me in the middle of the night, wakes me up, and says, "Hey Dylan, I need some assistance. I have a 30-foot snake." So I thought she was just joking with me at first, and sometimes we joke with each other and give each other prank calls and stuff like that. But I made it down there, and sure enough, there was a large snake under these people's, I believe it was a eucalyptus bush that was going alongside the fence line. All I did was grab it with a catch pole, got that around its head. The snake obviously coiled up around the pole, and then we just carried it to the truck like a rotisserie rack. One person on one side, one person on the other side, and we put it in the truck like that. We'd let go of the loop, and it hung out in the truck for the way back.
A lot of the training for some of these exotics kind of happens like that moment in time. You don't really respond to a domesticated deer call every day. When it comes to like a Burmese python, it's, the officers, they're really good with their control stick, or the catch pole as it's known. Some of these are just really kind of bizarre calls that they just have to use their instincts. Bear in mind, the officers are dealing with some of the most vicious dogs that you might see walking the street. Some of them are bully breed dogs. Some of them are very aggressive. And these officers don't scare easily. In fact, I think the Burmese python scared that one officer more so than a large pit bull coming at her. Those are just such weird, odd calls, and you don't really know how to handle the Burmese python, and you don't want to get choked to death. So those types of calls are sort of like, you learn as you go sometimes.
Every call out comes with a risk, and Riverside officers can just never be sure what they'll encounter when they arrive at a scene.
At the time of it, it's a little hectic and scary just because you don't know if it's fully domesticated. A lot of people, they have these quote-unquote wild animals for pets and never socialize them properly, so sometimes they will bite or do other things that aren't foreseen.
Much of what Riverside County Animal Services does also involves educating the public about choosing the right pet and then providing that pet with the appropriate care.
Those folks that like, for example, to have a Burmese python, sometimes they get them when they're young, and then they're not really fully educating themselves on just how large those snakes can get. And it's not the easiest pet to care for once it's an adult pet. I mean, they get 20 to 30, they get very long and very wide. And when you go out of town and you ask your buddy to, feed your pet, make sure the buddy knows how to close the tank of the Burmese python securely, because that's when you get into problems where, the next door neighbor finds out that you have a 20-foot Burmese python. Educating the general public on exotics is important because some people like to have interesting pets. And then when it comes to animals like a tegu lizard, quite an amazing critter, but they can get big too. And your neighbor may not want to see that tegu lizard knocking on their front door. So, it's really making sure that that exotic pet is going to stay in your property and not wander off, because that can really scare the heck out of somebody if they are finding out that you own that tegu lizard and they didn't know that.
Another one, I had a tegu running down Wood Road. Somebody called for a large lizard in the road, so I arrived on scene, and sure enough, there was, the body was probably only about 2 feet long, but the tail's about 3 feet long, and their tail is stronger than heck, so they can whip you and cut you open with that.
It's kind of like keeping some of the more aggressive dog breeds. If you've got a responsible owner that knows what they're doing, you can keep some of those safely. And then there's some things that you just shouldn't have. When we walk into a house and somebody's caught a rattlesnake from out in the desert and it's in an aquarium, it's a venomous snake. Nobody should be keeping those as pets. Boa constrictor, there are responsible people out there that can keep them as a pet, but it's not a pet for everybody. Most people probably don't have the skills, the ability, the finances, just the space to keep something that can potentially get as large as those are going to get.
We're in the business of promoting responsible pet ownership, whether you own a dog, a cat, or a rabbit, or a horse, a tortoise. We always want people to love that animal and make it part of your family. We don't really have any strong opinion one way or the other when it comes to exotic pets. We just don't like when somebody no longer is interested in being the pet owner of said exotic pet, and then they just release it into the wild and scaring their neighbors, or also shamefully allowing that animal to suffer because it could get hit by a car just like a dog or a cat, or it goes off into the wild and gets killed by other critters. But it's shameful when the pet loses its charm and then they think, oh, I'll just dump it in the riverbed, or I'll just release it. If you have an exotic pet, know how long that pet will be in your life. A tortoise, for example, can live 70, 80, 90, 100 years. So you might want to put the tortoise in your will and know that your son is going to be caring for the next 50 years of that tortoise's life. That's the only thing we'd like to share with people that are interested in exotic pets is know it's a part of your family. And when it loses its charm, don't forget, you're still the pet parent.
The officers at Riverside County Animal Services have dealt with everything from escaped emus to roaming reptiles. And when it comes to exotic animals, they've seen firsthand that too little knowledge can be a dangerous thing.
I think that, at least here in California, for the most part, with stuff that could kill a human being, I think that those who have them that do it legally are able, okay, but they have to reach such a bar. It's such a high bar for them to get to those proper permits and stuff. I'm kind of okay with those people. It's the backyard person who doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't have that training and hasn't gone through all the permitting process and the inspection process to try and keep a lion or a tiger or, something else along those lines, that it's a recipe for disaster.